Hi, everybody. I'm glad you came in here. Nice count of people interested in what I'm up to. First, I'd like to thank Crowd Supply and for sponsoring the takedown and accepting my talk, and hopefully everybody gets something out of what I have to say. My name is Craig Topham, and I work for the Free Software Foundation. I'm a copyright and licensing associate for the FSF, and I work on what's called the Licensing and Compliance Lab, which is made up of myself. There's actually supposed to be another person with me. I'm hearing a little feedback, a little bit, like a hum. And the lab is made up of myself and soon to be another person. We have licensing volunteers, which are people that specialize in free software licensing. And also there's a legal team that we have, which make up the lab. And so there's a lot of things that we're up to, but today I'm just gonna focus on the Respect Your Freedom certification program. And maybe at the end I could talk a little more about what we do, but I doubt we'll have time.
Is that the official logo?
Yes, that's the certification labeling. And it's the same thing as like you like have organic food, you have little certified organic. It's like that, but for devices to make sure it fully respects your freedom. Is anybody here not familiar with the Free Software Foundation? All right. Well, the Free Software Foundation was founded in the mid-'70s with the purpose of promoting computer user freedom. And what that means is, for example, anybody here have a Mac computer with a Mac OS on it? So, lots of hands. So the reality is you don't control that computer, Apple does. And we find that unethical for them to maintain that position, and also it's just unjust in general. And that's what we're fighting for. And the things we did, not me, but the organization did, is a couple of big things. Is one, they sponsored the GNU project. Is everybody familiar with the GNU project and GNU Linux? Okay, so that's the free operating system that was started, again, slightly before the foundation was founded. And it worked. We have a fully free operating system. The World Wide Web pretty much runs on GNU Linux. Last time I looked, it's like 98% or something like that all the web servers run GNU Linux. And the other thing that the foundation did was wrote the GNU General Public License. I guess I can go to my next slide. This is what I'm talking about. Is anybody not familiar with the GNU General Public License? Ooh, nice. All right. So yeah, that's what we do. And if you have any, and there's other stuff that we do. And if you're interested, you go to fsf.org and find out. There's a lot of activities with the campaigns team that does a lot of work. And the one final note is when I talk about free, I'm talking about freedom. I find it very amusing. I'm wearing our company's logo, Free Software, Free Society. And I find it amusing when you say free society, nobody bats an eye. They don't go, what do you mean a free society? What, nobody works and everything's for free? It's like, no, we get it. But when you say free software, people seem to lose their minds. And that's why open source has seemed to have dominated the landscape. But maybe someday we'll come back around. So what I'm going to talk about today is the RYF program, basically describing how it is, and then I'm going to go through a little bit of how the process works, how I examine a device for freedom. So quick history, a short history of the RYF. The first device was certified in 2013, and that's pretty much it. That's very short. There's not a lot of milestones. We just kind of slowly been working on it. And I've got a couple sample devices up here. Up in the upper left-hand corner is a ZeroCat chip flasher. Below is the most recent entry from Think Penguin. It's a VPN router. Of course, you have the X200 in the middle there by Vikings. That's the Talos 2 main board and another little Wi-Fi chip card from Think Penguins, and then the Lulzbot. What is the name of that thing?
The Taz.
Yes, the Taz. Oh, here it is, Taz 6. So, I realized just before I started my talk I didn't have anything to drink. So my mouth is very dry, but that's okay. So now I'm going to talk about the criteria that we use for the RYF certification program. The first one, of course, is 100% free software. The device has to run on 100% free software. And to that end, we have what's called the endorsed distros list. And these are operating systems that we've reviewed and in cooperation with the maintainers of the distribution have cleared out anything that's non-free. So the example of that is Triskel is the one I use. Parabola, I can't rattle them all off, and it's probably not necessary. But at the end, I'll show you, there's a link I'll share with you where you can go and look at that list. And the next up is the free software directory, which is it's a directory, it's a wiki instance, or media wiki instance. No, a semantic media wiki instance that has the catalog of all the free software that has been reviewed and the licenses checked to make sure it's all free software, and that's what you would go to find software for your device. Yes?
When they say free, do they include permissive licenses or only GPL licenses?
It does include permissive licenses. If you go to fsf.org, or actually GNU.org, there's a license list where we list all the ones that are compatible with the GNU General Public Licenses, and then ones that aren't but are still free, and then ones that are like non-free. So that's worth checking out. But great, thank you for the question. Yeah, so that's the free software directory, and so there is one exception that we have for the RYF program, and that's the field programmable gate arrays. So basically, it's a chip, and I've put up here, I'm not going to read that, but that's what the criteria reads, and basically it says, we know the FPGAs are out there, but as long as you can't change it, if you can't change it and the manufacturer can't change it, then we find that acceptable. The issue that we would have is where the FPGA is actually programmable by the manufacturer, but you as a user can't do it. I've seen devices where that was possible remotely, and so a device like that just would not get certified because of the risk of the manufacturer being able to access and modify the software on your device. So moving on to another criteria is the installation of the modified software. So whatever's on the device, the user needs to be able to have access to the source code and be able to install it on the device. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And this, just as a side note, there's the GNU General Public License version 3, section 6. This is where it talks about the requirement. I have it up here again. I'm not going to read it verbatim. It basically says it describes what's necessary in order to install the modified versions onto your device. And then I made a note about TiVoization. Is anybody not familiar with TiVoization? It's a made-up word. Basically, it's taking this is where like permissive license would come in, so they don't require the sharing of the source code necessarily. And so basically TiVoization, does anybody remember what a TiVo is? A couple people out there. So basically what TiVo did is they took free software and they locked it inside the device and were able to sell and profit from free software without giving back to the community, which is rude. Another example of that is Apple with their Mac OS. Some portions of that operating system is based off of free BSD. And again, Apple benefits without giving back to the community. And that's getting back to that unethical thing that I mentioned earlier. The next criteria, and this is the most exciting slide, I think. Being able to compile the code. Of course, this means that the source code has to be available and that it compiles. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the process, but yeah, and it also has to compile on a free operating system. So if it requires Windows in order to compile, that doesn't work. It has to be on an endorsed distribution or a free operating system. And then, of course, the software installation and maintenance must be free. Wait. Hold on. Yeah, what it takes, the tools it takes to compile the software, not only has to be on a free system, but those tools also have to be free and available. Another criteria is no spyware, backdoors, or DRM. Spyware, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It's just doing something that you don't necessarily want it to do. Then there's backdoors, which is very difficult to detect necessarily. And I'll talk a little bit about how we address when issues are found. But the device can't have those things. Like I said, they're hard to find, but if we do find one, that would terminate the certification. And of course, digital restrictions management. it's supposed to be digital rights management, but we found over the years that people abuse it to restrict what people can and can't do with their data, particularly around music. I'm sure you're all aware. There's also, for example, if there's any students in here, have you been forced to buy an ebook that expires at the end of your term? But that's a thing. That's just people abusing it. So to that end, so we have what's called the bounty program, where we issue GNU bucks when people find an issue with either an endorsed distro or an RYF device. And this is where we really lean on the community, a bunch of hackers, to find issues with something. And it works pretty well. And if you find something, we issue this little GNU buck as a novelty thing. And then a part of the certification is that the person using the certification mark will cooperate with feedback. So if we give them an issue, that they'll address that issue in a timely manner and not just sit on it and let time go by. So that's kind of the general criteria of the Respect Your Freedom certification program. And this, I can sum up pretty easily. So there's another angle to the RYF certification, and that's kind of how the device is marketed. And basically, without going down the list, we don't want to promote anything non-free. And that's really easy to get on board if the vendor shares our values, so it doesn't seem like homework. It's more like they're with us and they want to present the device in a manner that doesn't promote non-free, non-free anything, I guess. It's not just software. There's documentation and formats that all need to be free. An example of that would be like a music player that only plays MP3 and FLAC files, because those are proprietary formats. It needs to be able to play free formats. Yeah, there's a lot of details, and what are we doing on time? Okay. I don't think it's necessary to get into all that. Because I do want to take some time to talk about the process. So what happens is somebody contacts us with a device, and there's an initial, we have like a checklist that we give them to work on and to go through it. And that's a pretty lengthy process. We have to look at their web page, make sure it doesn't have anything non-free, and there's certain ways that you can't use the certification mark. And that's kind of all handled up front and make sure they're on board with everything before they end up shipping us a device to be examined. And this is part of what I do is my job. I get the device in my hand, and the packaging has to be nothing non-free, and so it's like an unboxing video that I do without filming. And then I examine the device. So the first thing I look for is the source code. Where's the source code? Typically, it'll be shipped with the device, like on a CD, but that's becoming less and less common. Once the device is certified, we actually put the source up on ryf.fsf.org, where people can get to it related to the specific device that's being certified. If they don't provide the source, there at least needs to be an offer for source, but normally they're sending the source out with the device. And so once I have my hands on the source code, you take time to go through the source code. And you typically start with the README file, and if it's well documented, it's going to have everything you need as far as the copyright and licensing goes for the device. There's a lot of programs out there that don't. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, looking for the basic stuff, the install file, the copying file, which has the license for the device, if they've done things well. Actually, no, let me take that back. If they've done things the way we prefer them to do it. There's no standard for licensing of software code. There's definitely recommendations, but there's no like official standard that everybody's required to do. So one of the tools that I use, there's Scan Code Toolkit and a program called Fossology that scan the code base, which can be very large, and looking for proprietary licenses, looking for incompatible licenses. And that's just, it's a lot of work, and that's kind of why, I should have mentioned earlier that we only have 46 devices approved, and it is kind of just a time-consuming thing, and FSF is a very small organization, but I'm hoping to turn that around someday soon.
Question, so how
Yeah.
many people are in your department working?
It's just me at the moment, but I have a manager that would normally be there. So, and in the past, the manager handled the upfront stuff, like the communication with the vendor and things like that, and all I had to do was just examine the device. So looking at the source code, and there's also kind of manually looking through it. What the scan code toolkit Fossology will get was like little hints of like, oh, this has got an unknown license. So I go look at it, see what folder it's in, kind of look around where that file was, and you'll find stuff. The thing that I found the scan code toolkit is good for is finding proprietary licenses, because there'll be, out of a thing with 1,000 code files, there'll be like 2 of them that are titled, this is Broadcom's property, you cannot use this, and we have to find a way around it. So if you're interested in how to examine a program for freeness, every Friday from noon to 3 Eastern Daylight Time, we host the Free Software Directory meeting. We still on this? Yeah. Where I walk people through examining the code. We have an entry, we go download the source code, we run the scan, look through it. These are typically smaller, so it can happen within like an hour and a half, but it's a good way to get that skill set. So once the source code is taken care of, the next thing is looking at the integrated circuits. It'd be nice if they provided a bill of materials with the device. That's just basically a list of all the components that are on the device. But that's not typically the case. A lot of the devices that we certified are like kind of used, like the X200 laptop as an example, and other devices that are just work on free software. They tend to be often dated. But what I end up doing is getting a magnifying glass and looking at each chip and identifying it, and then going online and looking for the data sheets to find out what it can and can't do. One of them I found that you could change the FPGA, but it required Windows to do it, and it's like, no, there goes that. But it's just homework. It's basically just research. And so go out and find the data sheets and make sure it fits within the exception that we have with the FPGAs. The next step is compiling, and that's a little involved. You've got to identify all the dependencies for the program that you're using, which can be very lengthy, but it's just, you just got to take the time to do it, because there's dependencies of dependencies of dependencies, and ad nauseum as far as I know. And so what I do when I start the compiling process, I run a log file of all the activity so I can go back through and review to see what's happening during the compiling process. The first thing I try to do is compile it offline to see if it works without having to download anything. And if it doesn't work, you compile it again with a network monitor of some sort, and that's going to give you a log. Again, you can parse it and dig through it, but it needs to be reviewed to make sure everything that it's not going out and downloading some blob or proprietary blob that you don't want in your device. Once that's done, there's kind of a few powering the device up and monitoring its network activity. Doing like a port scan to see if, why is this port open? What's going on there? But normally that kind of activity, we rely on the volunteers, because that's, people like that stuff and they're into that and trying to find issues, get to hacking. And that's pretty much it. And once I've gone through the examination process and the presentation on the website is good, we certify the device, and they're allowed to use the mark on that device. There's very limited, there's a contract and all this stuff that's involved, what they can and can't do with the mark. And then of course they agree the termination, that if they aren't continuing to comply with our criteria, that they will revoke their right to use the license to use the mark. That's it. Thank you. We can do some questions, but I'll come back to this slide, but real quick, plugs. Next month, July 13th through the 16th is FOSSI 2023. This is a program put on by the Software Freedom Conservancy, and the intention is to replace OSCON, which was a corporate, hold my tongue. Yeah, this is meant to replace that because, I don't know if you've heard, COVID shut them down permanently, and they're not coming back as far as I know. And this is hopefully to replace the corporate thing with getting back to the grassroots and the community that we all are. So up here I've got the ryf.fsf.org is the main site. If you are a vendor and are interested in getting certification, just email ryf@fsf.org. There's also HNode. I could have mentioned that earlier. So what hnode.org is a collection of hardware that's not certified, but it's a collection of hardware that we know runs on free software. And it's run by volunteers, and it's if you're looking for hardware or wondering if something you have works with free software besides trying to put free software on it, it's a pretty good resource. Defectivebydesign.org is the campaigns team to fight DRM. I wish that was a prettier URL, but the gnu.org/distros/distros.html that's the endorsed distro list that I mentioned earlier. Directory.fsf.org, my email address, craigt@fsf.org if you have any questions. And of course, is anybody here a Free Software Foundation associate member? Not a one. Yeah, so the Free Software Foundation depends on associate members. It's only $10 a month, $120 a year. It basically keeps our lights on. Majority of our operational costs are covered by the membership dues. We went to that program to get away from corporate donations, and so it's just a way of serving the community and having the community get back. There are some perks to it, so please check that out. Now we can get to the questions with the 15 seconds we have left. But I'll be around. Oh, sorry. Well, before we get to it, I got stickers and a thing about the RYF program, some propaganda, and what is free software. Now, the propaganda is the privacy is impossible without free software, and this is true because if it's not free and you can't see what the source code is doing, you don't know what it's doing, and therefore it's literally. I'm not one for like things that. Where am I trying to? Hyperbole? Not hyperbole. It's what do you call that when it's may not necessarily be true?
Exaggeration.
No, there's the word. It's escaping me right now, but it's true. You can't if you're interested in privacy and you're using proprietary software, there's no guarantee that your privacy is being protected. All right, questions. Sen.
Yeah. So has the FSF pursued any sort of like joint certification through like the Open Source Hardware Association?
No, we haven't. Yeah, the Open Source Hardware Association and the Open Hardware Repository are a couple of organizations we've looked at in the past, and we're interested because it's just a bunch of devices that could very well be, certified by participate in the program. But yeah, it's not the RYF program. It hasn't expanded, but yeah, that is on our radar and list. You had a question?
I was curious about so this seems like pretty all-encompassing. Your device has to be 100% free to get this, which I understand. But I think a lot of things exist on the spectrum, right? Like a Raspberry Pi, not 100% free, but a whole lot of free that in the back of it.
Yeah.
Right? Is there any sort of like, my thing is 99% free or something like that?
The middle ground. I agree with what you're describing. We actually have, the campaigns team has started this thing called the Freedom Ladder. And it's a way to get them on the first rung, like using a Raspberry Pi would be a first step versus using something that's totally proprietary. But historically, the Free Software Foundation is very, purists, we were uncompromising. For freedom, though, it's like, we'll get to a second, but it's like, I look at like people that care about clean drinking water for everybody. those people are extremists. They think everybody, not a single person excluded, should have clean drinking water. And free software is the same way. We want all software to be free.
But you created the FPGA exception. It would be nice to highlight devices with FPGAs that don't need the exception.
That's true. There's more text. If you go to the site and look at the criteria, there's more text where we hope that someday the FPGA is available.
It would be good to have two.
Yes, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah,
So you're, again, to the FPGA exception.
sure.
You're talking about the manufacturer can't modify it after the fact. So that implies that a, say, JTAG interface to the FPGA would be disqualified.
What's a JTAG?
One of the ways that you could talk to a.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, like, you break out the physical pins to be able to program it.
Gotcha. That's how they do the Libra boot is applied to the X200s, is putting a little jumper on it. And,
Right, so, that would mean that, you know, the manufacturer could, if they physically had the device, program the FPGA after the fact. So would that be disqualified for the FPGA exception?
I'd have to discuss it with my team, but I don't think so because it's not in their possession. There's a barrier by them not having a hold of it. So I think unless they snuck into your house at night, which.
The reason I ask is,
No.
you know, even though it's not intended for reprogramming after the fact, it does make it possible, and I would see a device as less free if it had an FPGA, even if it was programmed with the binary block of the factory, that didn't have the JTAG interface.
No, you're right, and we do use the word, this one I remembered, compromise. It's a compromise that we understand that possibility, but it's like, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to certify. We'd be very little what we could certify. Yeah, so it is a compromise, but.